This video will show how to set up 3D grids in GMS. We'll see a simple coarse rectangular grid, a fine rectangular grid, and then rectangular grids that are refined around well points using different bias factors. The model will start with a simple square region, and we'll set up the size of the grid. The origin is at 100, 100, and the grid will be 1,000 by 1,000 feet by 50 feet thick. There's a 10 by 10 grid, and we'll go and remake this grid using 100 points by 100 points. So we have to re-enter the origin and the length. And now we'll make it 100 by 100, and we'll make it 5 layers in the Z direction. So there's 100 by 100, and there are the 5 layers in cross section. Now we delete that grid, and we're going to use the grid frame to make the grid this time. So we put in a grid frame, and we set up the origin X, Y, Z, and then the dimensions. We can type these in, or we could use the cursor to position the grid frame. The advantage is that once we set up the grid frame, we can make multiple grids with the same dimension. So there are the dimensions, and there's the coarse grid. Now we use map to 3D grid, and we set up the fine grid from the grid frame. Okay, now I'm going to refine the grid around the point that I'm calling a well. And so I go to the coverage and I set up refinement, and I go to the attribute table and I click refinement, and I make the maximum size of the grid 100 feet. And then I'm going to go up to the menu and use the menu selection to make this grid. And there's the grid. It's refined around the well, and it gets bigger as you go away from the well. I'm going to go back to attributes, and I'm going to change the bias. I'm going to reduce it, and this reduces the rate at which the cells increase in size. You can see now the cells out away from the well are smaller than they used to be. So I increase the bias factor 1.4, and now the cells will increase quickly, and they'll grow up to the maximum size of 100, also make 5 layers. So there, over upper left hand side, you can see the cells are 100, and there are the 5 layers.